The coldness of the water was a shock, but the burning in my lungs was worse. I was sinking into the dark green silence of the lake, my clothes pulling me down like an anchor. Above me, the last glimmer of daylight shattered and disappeared. In that terrifying quiet, my husband Frank's voice echoed in my head, not a sound, but a memory from just moments before. His words were a desperate, urgent whisper, right before the world turned upside down. "Carol, listen to me. No splashing, no fighting. Let them think we're gone." Them. The sound of a powerful boat engine, the one that belonged to our son Alex, was already fading into the distance, a merciless hum growing fainter and fainter. My instincts screamed at me to kick, to fight my way back to the air, but Frank's command held me still. He was a fire captain for 40 years. He knew how to survive. And he knew our own son had just tried to murder us. But that final violent shove wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the end of a very long, very quiet war that had been fought inside the walls of our own home for the last year. To understand how we ended up at the bottom of that lake, you have to understand the house we built and the son who decided he was entitled to burn it all down. That house on Osprey Point wasn't just wood and nails, it was a living record of our marriage. To us, it was more precious than any mansion because we had poured our very lives into it, board by board. My husband Frank was a fire captain for 40 years. He spent his career running into burning buildings, a man who understood structure and integrity better than anyone I knew. When he retired, he didn't buy a set of golf clubs. He bought a table saw and a set of blueprints he'd drawn himself. His hands, which had carried people out of fires and comforted the terrified, were covered in a permanent layer of sawdust and calluses. They were the hands of a builder. I was an ER nurse. My life was about managing chaos, about patching people up and sending them back into the world. Our little piece of land on the lake was my sanctuary, the place I came to find quiet after the sirens faded. While Frank built the walls, I built the life inside them. I planted a garden that exploded with tomatoes every summer, chose the paint colors that caught the morning sun just right, and filled the rooms with the smell of fresh coffee and baking bread. We were a team. He built the vessel, and I made it a home. We weren't born with silver spoons in our mouths. We bought that plot of land back in the 90 seconds with money we'd saved for a decade. Frank worked countless overtime shifts, coming home smelling of smoke, his face grim with exhaustion. I picked up extra weekend hours at the hospital until my feet ached so badly I could barely walk to the car. We drove a beat-up Ford pickup and packed our lunches in a dented Coleman cooler. Every spare dollar went into a savings account we labeled Osprey Point. Our friends thought we were crazy, buying a patch of dirt and trees 2 hours from the city. But we saw what they couldn't. The way the sun set over the water, the tall pines that stood like silent sentinels. We saw our future. I'll never forget the day we broke ground. It was just the two of us with shovels and a whole lot of faith. For the next 10 years, every weekend was a trip to Home Depot. Every vacation was spent framing walls or running electrical wire. I learned how to mud drywall, and Frank taught himself how to do plumbing by watching videos at the public library. Our proudest moment was the fireplace. Frank refused to buy brick. Instead, he spent an entire summer wading into the lake, choosing smooth gray river stones one by one. He laid every single one himself, creating a massive hearth that became the heart of our home. That fireplace was Frank's masterpiece. It was solid, honest, and built to last forever. We thought we had built a life that could withstand anything. Life was simple, but it was good. On summer evenings, we'd sit on the deck Frank built, listening to the loons call across the water. We'd watch the annual 4th of July boat parade, where our neighbors would chug by on their pontoons, waving little American flags. Frank spent his days in the workshop he built out back, making beautiful handcrafted furniture, not to sell, but to give away to friends and family. I had my garden and my books. We had raised 2 sons, watched them grow up, and now we were supposed to be enjoying the quiet reward for a lifetime of hard work. We believed in the promise that if you were good people, if you worked hard and did the right thing, you would be safe. We were so terribly wrong. That home was our fortress, our legacy. Every scuff on the hardwood floor told a story. The time our youngest son Leo tried to ride his tricycle inside, the spot where our old golden retriever Gus used to sleep in the Sunday. It was more than an asset to be valued. It was our history. For 30 years, that stone fireplace had warmed us through every winter storm, its heat a constant, comforting presence. We never imagined the coldest storm, the one that would threaten to tear our world down to the studs, wouldn't come from the sky. It would come from our own blood. That storm arrived on a sunny Saturday in May, pulling up our gravel driveway in a brand new pearl-white Lexus that crunched the stones with a sound of expensive indifference. My son Alex stepped out, looking like he'd walked off the cover of a real estate magazine. His suit was tailored, his shoes shined to a mirror finish, and his smile was a bright, practiced thing that never quite reached his eyes. Behind him emerged his wife, Jessica. She was flawless, from her professionally highlighted hair to her pristine white sneakers that were clearly never meant for walking on anything but pavement. She carried a ridiculously expensive-looking cake from a boutique bakery, holding it out in front of her like an offering. "Mom! Dad!" Alex boomed, his voice full of a forced cheerfulness that always felt a little too loud for our quiet life. "Look at this place. It's better every time we come." They came inside, and the house immediately felt smaller, invaded by the scent of their expensive colognes and the restless energy they brought with them from the city. Jessica glided through the living room, running a perfectly manicured finger over the mantel of the fireplace, the one Frank had built with his own two hands. Her touch wasn't one of admiration, it was an appraisal. I saw her glance at the wide plank floors, then up at the vaulted ceiling. She was calculating square footage. "Carol, the house is just stunning," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You two have done such an amazing job. It's a fortress." I remember thinking that was a strange word to use. A fortress, as if it needed defending. We sat out on the deck, the one that overlooked the lake. Frank had just finished restaining it, and the scent of cedar was still in the air. Jessica served the cake, each slice a perfect, geometric wedge. They asked all the right questions about our health, our neighbors, my garden. It was a perfect performance of a loving family visit. I knew with the sinking certainty that only a mother can feel that it was a performance. After about 20 minutes of small talk, Alex cleared his throat. The show was over. The business was about to begin. "Mom, Dad," he started, leaning forward and placing his hands together on the table. "Jessica and I were talking on the drive up. And we're just so proud of what you've built here. This isn't just a house, it's a legacy." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "And that's why we need to talk about protecting it." Frank stiffened beside me. He picked up his coffee mug but didn't drink. "Protecting it from what, Alex? The raccoons?" Alex gave a small, indulgent laugh. "No, Dad. From probate. From taxes. From all the legal headaches that can tear an estate apart. You've worked your entire lives for this. We just want to make sure it's safe." He slid a glossy brochure across the table. It was from his real estate firm, but on the top was a section titled Legacy Planning. "I took the liberty of speaking with our attorney," he continued, his voice dropping to a serious, confidential tone. "The smartest thing to do would be to put the house, and your other assets, into a living trust. We'd name me as the executor. It's just a piece of paper, really. It doesn't change anything for you day to day. But it means that when the time comes, everything transitions seamlessly, no government interference. It stays in the family, where it belongs." The silence that followed was heavy. The only sounds were the lapping of the water against the shore and the distant cry of a hawk. His words were so reasonable, so logical. Every financial advisor in America would probably tell us he was right. But my stomach was in a cold, tight knot. It didn't feel like an act of love. It felt like a transaction. It felt like he was gently, politely, asking us to sign over our own lives. Jessica reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her skin was cool and smooth. "We just worry, Carol," she said softly. "We want to be able to take care of you both without having to fight through red tape if there's an emergency." "An emergency," he said, "when the time comes." And she said if there's an emergency. They were talking about our deaths, right here on the deck we had built together, on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I looked over at Frank. He was staring at the stone fireplace, visible through the sliding glass door. His masterpiece. His expression was unreadable, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. Then Jessica stood up and walked over to the fireplace, peering at the stones. "This is incredible," she said, turning back to us. "The raw, rustic look is so in right now. You know, a good stager could really make this the centerpiece of a Zillow listing. The ROI on a feature like this is just insane. Return on investment. Zillow listing." The words hit Frank like a physical blow. I saw it in his eyes. She wasn't seeing the summer he spent carrying those stones from the lake. She wasn't seeing the love and the sweat he'd poured into it. She was seeing a selling point, a feature, a number on a balance sheet. Frank slowly stood up. He looked at Alex, then at Jessica, and then back at the brochure on the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "We'll think about it," he said, and the finality in his tone was unmistakable. He turned and walked into his workshop, the screen door clicking shut behind him. Alex was left sitting there, his perfect smile finally gone, replaced by a flicker of irritation, as cold and hard as the stones in our fireplace. He said he wanted to protect our legacy. But as I watched him gather his papers, I had the chilling thought that what he really wanted was to cash it in. The air on the deck turned instantly cold after Frank left. I swear you could have heard a pin drop over the sound of the crickets starting their evening song. That glossy brochure about legacy planning sat on the table between us, looking obscene in the fading light. Jessica forced a bright, brittle smile. "He's just tired," she said, a little too quickly. "It's a lot to take in all at once. We understand." But Alex wasn't trying to smooth anything over. The charming, concerned son had vanished, and in his place was a man I barely recognized. He stood up and began packing his leather briefcase, not with the smooth efficiency he usually had, but with sharp, angry movements. He snapped the latches shut with a sound like a gunshot. The pleasant afternoon was officially over. I felt that familiar maternal urge to fix things, to smooth the ruffled feathers. "Alex, your father didn't mean anything by it," I said softly, standing up. It's a big decision. He needs time to think." He stopped, his back to me, and then he turned around slowly. The look on his face was one of pure, undiluted bitterness. It was an expression I hadn't seen since he was a teenager who'd lost a basketball game. "Time to think?" he said, his voice low and tight. "No, Mom, that's not what this is. This is about trust." He took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine. "Of course, you'd never trust me. You saved all your trust for Leo." The name hit the air and seemed to hang there, a ghost at our family gathering. Leo, my beautiful, complicated younger son, the musician, the dreamer, the one we had lost 15 years ago in a boating accident right here on this very lake. We almost never said his name out loud anymore. It hurt too much. For Alex to throw it at me like a weapon felt like a betrayal so deep it took my breath away. I just stared at him, speechless. He saw my shock and pressed his advantage. "Don't look so surprised," he sneered. "It was always Leo. Leo needed the top-of-the-line guitar. Leo needed the apartment in the city to find his muse. Leo needed you to co-sign his loans so he could record his album that went exactly nowhere." Each word was a sharpened stone, aimed to wound. But me? Alex had to get student loans for business school. Alex had to work 2 jobs to make rent. Alex had to build a career from nothing, while you two were funding Leo's little artistic fantasy. My heart ached with a fierce, protective pain. "That's not fair, Alex," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Your brother, he was different. He needed our help in a different way." "Different?" He let out a short, ugly laugh. "Yeah, he was different. He was the favorite. The one who got all the understanding, all the second chances. I was just the one who was supposed to be responsible, the one who was supposed to get good grades and not cause any trouble." He gestured around at the house, the lake, the setting Sunday, and I guess I'm still just the responsible one. The one you call when the plumbing breaks, but not the one you trust with the legacy. Jessica stood beside him, a silent, supportive statue, her expression a careful mask of sympathy for her aggrieved husband. They were a team, a united front against us. He picked up his briefcase. "We're leaving," he announced. There were no hugs, no love yous. He just walked to his car, Jessica trailing in his wake. As he passed the fireplace, he gave the stones a look of such profound contempt it made me shiver. I stood alone on the deck, the expensive bakery cake left half-eaten on the table. The setting sun cast long shadows that looked like grasping fingers. Alex's angry words echoed in the quiet air. For years I had told myself his resentment was just a normal sibling rivalry, a lingering jealousy that had never quite healed. But standing there, with the chill of the lake air on my skin, a colder, more terrifying thought began to form in the back of my mind. I thought Alex was just jealous of the life we gave his brother. I didn't realize that Leo's death wasn't just a memory for Alex, it was a business plan. That thought settled into my mind like a shard of ice. After they left, Frank and I didn't talk about it. We couldn't. The accusation was too monstrous, too ugly to give voice to. We cleaned up the leftover cake, washed the dishes, and went about our evening as if nothing had happened, the silence between us stretching thin and tight like a fishing line about to snap. But something had broken, and the crack began to spread. The pressure campaign started the following Monday. It wasn't a frontal assault, it was death by 1,000 cuts, a slow, relentless erosion of our peace. The phone would ring every evening, right as we sat down for dinner. The caller ID would flash Alex, and a wave of exhaustion would wash over me before I even answered. His voice would be smooth and professional, all traces of his previous anger gone, replaced by a tone of patient concern. "Just calling to check in, Mom," he'd say. "Did you and Dad have a chance to look over that brochure?" The first few times I was polite. "We're still thinking, honey. It's a big step." By the fourth call, Frank refused to even come to the phone. I'd see him through the kitchen window, walking down to the dock and staring out at the water, his shoulders slumped. I was left to handle Alex alone. "We're fine, Alex, we're managing," I'd insist, my voice getting a little tighter each time. Then the emails started. They'd arrive in my inbox with subject lines designed to terrify anyone over 60. The hidden dangers of probate court. Will your medical bills wipe out your children's inheritance? 5 legal documents every senior must have. Each one contained a link to a slick article, often with a smiling, silver-haired couple on the header, and always at the bottom a note, "Mom, just some food for thought. Love, A." Jessica's approach was different, quieter, and somehow more insidious. She started calling me midday, just for a girl chat. She'd ask about my garden, then pivot. "Carol, I know how overwhelming all that paperwork can be. Your 401k, statements, the life insurance policies, it's a full-time job. I'd be more than happy to come up for a day and help you get everything organized. We can put it all in a binder, make it simple." Her offer sounded so helpful, so kind, but I could picture it clearly. Jessica at our kitchen table, her sharp eyes scanning our private financial documents, her mind a silent calculator, tallying up our worth. It felt like a violation, a polite home invasion, when I told her, "Thank you, dear, but Frank has his own system." Her voice dropped a degree, the sweetness curdling just a bit. "Of course," she'd reply. "We just don't want you to be a burden on yourselves." A burden. That word was the real weapon. They wielded it expertly. Every suggestion, every article, every phone call was wrapped in the language of love, but the message underneath was clear: you are getting old. You are becoming incompetent. You will soon be a problem that we, your loving children, will have to solve. The constant pressure began to wear on us, creating friction where there had been none for 40 years. Frank grew silent and withdrawn, spending more and more time in his workshop. The scent of sawdust that used to comfort me now just smelled like his retreat. One evening, after a particularly grueling call with Alex, I found Frank staring at the stone fireplace, his hand resting on the cool gray surface. "He's not going to stop, is he?" Frank said, not looking at me. "He's just worried, Frank," I said, though the words tasted like a lie in my mouth. He turned to me then, his eyes dark with a frustration I couldn't fully understand. "Worried? Carol, he looks at this house and he doesn't see us. He sees a commission. He looks at this fireplace and he sees a selling feature. He's not trying to protect our legacy. He's trying to liquidate it." The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was weeding my tomato plants when Alex's Lexus crunched up the driveway again. This time, he wasn't alone. A nervous-looking woman in a pantsuit got out with him, carrying a briefcase. "Mom, great news," Alex said, his smile so wide it looked painful. "This is Brenda. She's a mobile notary. I figured since you're so busy, we'd just bring the paperwork to you. It'll only take 5 minutes." He held up a thick sheaf of papers. On top, in bold letters, I could read the words, "Durable Power of Attorney." My blood ran cold. He had cornered us. To refuse now, in front of a stranger, would be a direct, public declaration of distrust. Frank came out of his workshop, wiping his hands on a rag, his face a thundercloud. "Alex, what is this?" Frank asked, his voice dangerously calm. "It's the solution, Dad," Alex said, holding out the papers and a pen. "It's us taking care of you. Just a few signatures, and we can all stop worrying." Frank looked from the papers to Alex's eager face, then to the nervous notary who was trying to look anywhere but at us. He took the papers from Alex's hand. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to sign. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, ripped the entire stack in half. the sound of tearing paper echoing in the quiet afternoon. He handed the 2 pieces back to Alex. "We are not worried," Frank said, each word a piece of granite. "And we don't need to be taken care of. You should go." Alex stared at the torn papers in his hand, his face pale with fury. The mask was gone. This wasn't a son. This was a predator whose prey had just bitten back. He threw the papers on the ground, turned without another word, and got back in his car. As he drove away, spitting gravel from his tires, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much, much worse. The quiet that settled over the driveway after he left was heavier than any sound. The 2 halves of the torn power of attorney papers lay on the gravel, like a surrender flag that had been ripped in 2. Frank stared at them for a long moment, his face as hard and unreadable as the stones on our hearth. He didn't say a word. He just turned, walked back into his workshop and slid the heavy wooden door shut. The click of the latch felt like a final, definitive statement. I was left alone, the afternoon sun feeling suddenly weak and cold. I bent down and picked up the torn papers, my hands trembling. Durable power of attorney. The words seemed to mock me. He wanted the power to make decisions for us, to control the life we had so carefully built, and his father had answered him by tearing that power to shreds. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was not just a family argument anymore. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. For the rest of the day, a heavy, unspoken dread hung in the air. I tried to busy myself in the garden, but my hands felt clumsy. I tried to read, but the words on the page were just black marks. The silence from the workshop was the loudest sound in the house. Usually, I could hear the hum of the table saw or the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper, the sounds of creation. But now, there was nothing. It was the silence of a man who had retreated so far into himself, I was afraid I couldn't reach him. When evening came and he still hadn't emerged, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked to the workshop and pushed open the heavy door. The familiar smell of sawdust and varnish filled my lungs, a scent that had always meant comfort and safety. But Frank wasn't working. He was sitting on a low stool in the middle of the room, surrounded by his tools and half-finished projects. He was just sitting in the dark, staring at an old, leather-bound book on his lap. "Frank?" I said softly. He didn't look up. "I should have told you years ago," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't place. "I was a coward." I walked closer and saw what he was holding. It was his old fire captain's log. A thick, official-looking ledger where he had meticulously recorded every call, every incident for 30 years of his career. It was a book of facts, of order in the face of chaos. It was his Bible. "Tell me what?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a grief so profound it was like looking into a 15-year-old wound that had never healed. "About Leo," he said. "It wasn't an accident." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I leaned against his workbench for support, the rough wood digging into my back. "What are you talking about?" He opened the logbook. The pages were filled with his neat, blocky handwriting. He turned to a date I knew by heart, a date that was burned into my soul, the day we lost our son. "I was the first captain on the scene, Carol," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "The call came in as a boater in distress. By the time my crew got there, it was a recovery, not a rescue." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I told everyone what the official report says, that he must have hit a submerged log, that the engine stalled and the boat took on water in the storm. It was a neat, tragic story. Everyone believed it." He ran a trembling finger down the page. "But it was a lie. A lie I told myself. And then the whole world." He looked at me, his face a mask of agony. "The fuel line, Carol. It wasn't frayed from impact. It was cut, a clean cut, with a blade, and the boat's distress flare was gone. Someone had taken it. This wasn't an accident. The boat was sabotaged. Someone made sure that if Leo got into trouble out there, he had no way to call for help." My mind reeled. Who, Frank? Who would do that? But even as I asked the question, the horrifying answer was already taking shape in the cold, dark corners of my mind. He reached into a small wooden box on his workbench and pulled out a tiny, rusted piece of metal. It was the clasp from a watch band. "I found this on the floor of the boat, near the engine compartment," he said, his voice breaking. "It's from the watch we gave Alex for his college graduation. I found it and I knew he had been there. He finally broke, the decades of guilt and silence pouring out of him in a torrent of choked words. I saw it all in a flash. Alex's jealousy, their arguments over money. He was there, Carol. He was on that boat. He did it, and he watched his brother die. He buried his face in his hands. I had the evidence in my hand, my son the killer, and my other son, gone. In that moment, I couldn't lose you both. I couldn't, so I buried it. I put the clasp in my pocket, wrote the lie in my logbook, and I closed the case. I chose my living son over my dead one, and I have been living in hell every day since. I slid to the floor, the cold concrete seeping through my clothes. The room was spinning. Every memory of the last 15 years was suddenly tainted, twisted into something monstrous. Alex's strange lack of grief at the funeral, his immediate, almost obsessive focus on his own career, his bitterness. It wasn't just jealousy, it was the arrogance of a predator who had gotten away with the perfect crime. Frank knelt in front of me, his tears mirroring my own. "Don't you see, Carol?" he whispered, his voice raw with a new, urgent terror. All these years, I told myself he made a mistake, that he was just a kid who did something horrible in a moment of anger. But I was wrong. It wasn't a mistake, it was a plan. And now he's back. He killed his brother for this house. Now that we're getting older, he's just here to finish the job. That phrase, finish the job, hung in the dusty air of the workshop, a death sentence delivered in a whisper. For a long time, we just knelt there on the cold concrete floor, two old people whose world had been shattered by a 15-year-old secret. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. But underneath the grief, something else was beginning to stir. A cold, hard rage. The rage of a nurse who'd spent her life saving people, only to find out she couldn't save her own son. The rage of a captain who had run into fires, now facing one he couldn't put out. We didn't sleep that night. We sat at our kitchen table, the one Frank had built from a single slab of oak, and watched the darkness outside the window give way to a gray, misty dawn. The house was silent, but my mind was screaming. Frank was the first to speak, his voice flat, all the emotion burned out of it. "We can't go to the police," he said. "It wasn't a question. My logbook is a lie. I tampered with evidence. I'm an accessory after the fact. It's my word against his, 15 years later. They'd tear me apart on the stand. I'd be disgraced. And Alex, he'd walk." He was right. Our son had built a perfect life on a foundation of lies, while Frank had been trapped by one terrible truth. We were alone in this. No one would believe us. We were just two aging parents with a wild, unbelievable story about the successful son, the real estate mogul. They'd say we were confused, grieving, senile. Alex would make sure of it. I looked over at Frank, at his calloused builder's hands resting on the table. They were shaking. I reached out and put my own on top of his, stilling them. "You spent your life running into burning buildings, Frank," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You never ran away from a fire. You made a plan." A flicker of the old captain returned to his eyes. "The first rule of a 5-alarm fire," he said quietly, "is you don't fight it head on. You contain it. You set a backfire. You let it come to you, and you make it burn itself out." And that's when the plan was born. Not a plan of attack, but a plan of retreat, a calculated, strategic surrender. If Alex thought we were weak, we would become weak. If he thought we were scared, we would become terrified. We would give the vulture the dying prey it wanted to see, and we would lure him into a trap so perfectly constructed that he would never see the bars until they slammed shut. The next morning, I made the hardest phone call of my life. I rehearsed it in my head a dozen times, my heart hammering against my ribs. I dialed Alex's number, my hand trembling so much I had to steady it with the other. He answered on the second ring, his voice clipped and professional. "Alex Miller." I took a shaky breath and let the tears I'd been holding back finally come. "Alex, honey," I sobbed into the phone. "It's Mom." There was a pause. "Mom? What's wrong? You sound awful." "It's your father," I said, my voice cracking. He had a scare last night. His heart, he wouldn't let me call 911. He's so stubborn, you know how he is." "But Alex, I was so scared. This part wasn't a lie. I was scared, just not for the reasons he thought. We were wrong. You were right. We need your help. We need to sign those papers." The shift in his tone was immediate, the feigned concern replaced by a barely concealed hum of victory. Mom, calm down. It's okay. Of course. I'll take care of everything. I'll be up this weekend. After I hung up, I felt sick to my stomach, as if I had poisoned myself. Frank just looked at me and nodded, a grim approval in his eyes. Phase 1 was complete. That week our house transformed. It was no longer a home, it was a stage. Frank went to Costco and came back not with groceries but with 2 tiny nanny cams, the kind people use to watch their pets. We put one on the bookshelf in the living room, hidden between my gardening books. We put the other in the kitchen, tucked behind the spice rack. We started recording every phone call. Our life became a performance for an audience of 1. During our next phone call with Jessica, I let our secret weapon slip. While she was once again offering to organize our finances, I sighed heavily into the phone. I just don't know where Frank put the paperwork for his old policy from the fire department, I said, feigning confusion. He's had it forever. He said it was some special plan for first responders. I think the payout is something crazy. $500,000 maybe? I can't keep track. The silence on the other end of the line was electric. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. $500,000? She finally repeated, her voice a little too casual. Wow. Well, that's definitely something you'll want to find. The bait was in the water. We had given them a new reason to hurry, a much bigger prize than just the house. As we sat in our living room that evening, the little red light on the hidden camera blinking almost imperceptibly, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my gut. But now it was mixed with something else. Purpose. We were no longer the victims cowering in our home. We were the builders, and we were laying the foundation for one last very important project. We were building a trap. The trap was set, and then for a week, there was only silence. It was the most unnerving part of the whole ordeal. The phone didn't ring. No emails with terrifying subject lines appeared in my inbox. It was like living in the dead calm before a hurricane. We moved through our days in a state of high alert, every crunch of gravel on the driveway, every boat that passed on the lake, sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. We were 2 soldiers in a trench, waiting for an attack we knew was coming, but not knowing from which direction. Frank spent his time down at the dock, meticulously cleaning and checking our old fishing boat, a task he hadn't performed with such focus in years. I watched him from the kitchen window, his movements deliberate and sure. He wasn't just cleaning a boat, he was preparing a battlefield. Then, on Friday evening, the phone rang. It was Alex. Frank and I looked at each other, and I pressed the speakerphone button, my thumb leaving a sweaty print on the screen. "Hi, Mom," he said. The voice that came through the speaker was one I hadn't heard in a long time. It was the gentle, loving voice of the little boy I remembered, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. It was completely, terrifyingly false. "How are you and Dad feeling?" "We're all right, honey," I said, letting a weary quaver into my voice. "Just taking it easy." Good, he said soothingly. "Listen, I've been thinking a lot this week, and I realized something. Next Thursday, it's the 15th anniversary. He didn't have to say of what. The date was a scar on our hearts. 15 years since we lost Leo, the silence from our end of the line was heavy enough to crush bone. I know it's hard to think about," Alex continued, his voice dripping with a sympathy that was a vile imitation of the real thing. "But I feel like we've never really said a proper goodbye. Not as a family. We had the funeral, but we never, did something for him. Out on the water, his favorite place." I felt Frank's hand grip my shoulder, his fingers digging in slightly, a silent command to stay strong, to keep playing my part. "What are you suggesting, Alex?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I think we should take the boat out next Thursday," he said. "Jessica and I will come up, we'll pack a lunch. We'll go out to the middle of the lake, to the spot he loved, and, well, you still have his ashes, right? I think we should finally scatter them, say a few words. Honor his memory, together." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was going to murder us using the memory of the brother he had already killed as the lure. He was going to turn our deepest grief into a weapon against us. It was the most monstrous, diabolical plan I could have ever imagined. It was perfect. I let out a small, broken sound, a half-sob that was only partly faked. "Oh, Alex. I don't know. Being out on the water, after everything. It's so hard for your father and me." "I know, Mom," he said, his voice a gentle caress. That's why we have to do it, to face it together, to heal. As a family, it's what Leo would have wanted. It's what Leo would have wanted. The lie was so profound, so absolute, it almost had a physical weight. I looked at Frank. His face was pale, but his eyes were like chips of flint. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was ready. The prey had to agree to be caught. "Okay, honey," I whispered into the phone. "Okay, if you think it's for the best, we'll do it. For Leo." "That's my girl," he said, the triumphant satisfaction clear in his voice, even as he tried to hide it. "Don't you worry about a thing. Jessica and I will handle everything. We'll see you Thursday morning." After he hung up, I sank into a kitchen chair, my body trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. We had just accepted our own execution date. For the next few days, we lived in a surreal haze. We went about our chores, we ate our meals, we spoke in quiet, clipped sentences. We were two actors preparing for the most important performance of our lives. The day before they were due to arrive, I watched Frank walk down to the dock one last time. He opened a small, hidden compartment on the side of the boat's console, a space he'd built years ago for emergency supplies. He pulled out a small, orange, waterproof device, an emergency beacon. I saw him check the battery light. It glowed a steady green. He placed it back inside, his movements precise and unhurried, and then securely latched the compartment. He walked back up to the house, his face set. I was in the bedroom, folding 2 thick towels to pack in a tote bag, as if we were preparing for a normal day on the lake. Our eyes met across the room. There was no need for words of comfort or fear. We were past all that. We were the builders, and we had laid our last stone. Frank walked over, stood beside me, and looked out the window toward the calm, waiting water. "The vulture is coming home to roost," he said, his voice low and steady. "Let's not disappoint him." And we didn't. When Alex and Jessica arrived Thursday morning, the sun was shining in a sky so blue it hurt to look at. They came bearing gifts, like peace offerings before a war. Jessica had a wicker picnic basket filled with things we never ate: arugula salad with goat cheese, artisanal crackers, sparkling water in green glass bottles. Alex carried a small, heavy-looking wooden box. My heart seized when I saw it. Leo's ashes. He placed it on the kitchen counter with a reverence that was nauseatingly false. "Ready for a beautiful day on the water?" he asked, his smile as bright and empty as the sky. We played our parts. I was the frail, hesitant mother wringing my hands. Frank was the stoic, grieving father, his movements slow and heavy, as if the air itself was thick with sorrow. We let them lead us down to the dock, let them help us onto the old fishing boat like we were made of glass. Frank sat in the passenger seat, his eyes on the horizon, while I sat in the back, clutching a life vest to my chest. Alex took the helm, starting the engine with a confident roar. He was the captain now. The first 20 minutes were surreal. Jessica kept up a steady stream of cheerful chatter, pointing out herons on the shore and admiring the expensive houses lining the lake. Alex navigated with one hand on the wheel, the very picture of a successful man enjoying a day off with his loving, elderly parents. They were putting on a magnificent show. As we moved further from shore, toward the deep, open water in the center of the lake, I watched the sky begin to change. The perfect blue was becoming bruised with streaks of gray from the west. The wind picked up, ruffling the surface of the water from a glassy calm to a restless chop. A storm was rolling in. It was happening sooner than we'd expected, a real storm adding a terrifying layer of reality to Alex's manufactured one. Alex glanced at the sky, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing his face before he smoothed it back into a mask of concern. "Looks like we might get a little weather," he called over the engine's noise. "We better do this quickly." He steered us toward a remote part of the lake, a wide expanse of water framed by a rocky, uninhabited shoreline. No other boats were in sight. He handed the wooden box to me. "Here, Mom," he said softly. "I think you should hold him." The weight of the box in my lap was unbearable. This was my son, reduced to a container, a prop in his brother's final, monstrous act. I looked at Frank. He met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw all the love and all the pain of the last 40 years. And I saw something else, a signal. It's time. Just then, the engine sputtered. It coughed once, twice, and then died. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the wind and the slap of waves against the hull. "What the hell?" Alex said, turning the key again. The engine just clicked. "It must be the fuel line." "Dad, did you check the fuel line?" He was already building his alibi. Frank just stared at him, saying nothing. "Okay, no problem," Alex said, his voice a little too loud. He reached for the radio handset. "I'll just call the Marine Patrol." He clicked the button. "Hello? This is the Miller vessel, requesting assistance. Can anyone read me?" He clicked it again and again. Damn it, the radio's dead too. The storm must be causing interference. I saw Frank watch his hands, saw the almost imperceptible way Alex had loosened the radio's battery connection before he even picked it up. Jessica began to cry, her hands fluttering at her face. "Oh my God, Alex, what are we going to do? We're stranded." Her performance was flawless. Alex turned around then, and the performance was over. The concerned son, the loving husband, it all fell away. The face he turned to us was the one I'd seen in my nightmares. It was cold, empty, and final. He looked from the dead engine to the darkening sky, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Well," he said, "what a terrible, tragic accident." He took a step toward us. Frank stood up slowly, not to fight, but to face him. He positioned himself between me and Alex. Two captains on a sinking ship. "Leo loved the water," Alex said, his voice no more than a conversational murmur against the rising wind. "It's only right you join him." He didn't lunge. He didn't scream. He just moved forward with a calm, businesslike efficiency and placed his hands flat on his father's chest. Frank stumbled backward, his arms windmilling for a moment before he toppled over the side with a heavy splash. Then Alex's empty eyes found mine. I was still clutching the box of ashes, my knuckles white. He reached for me, and in that last second I saw everything. I saw the jealous little boy, the resentful teenager, the cold-blooded killer. He wasn't my son, he was a stranger. He shoved, the world tilted violently, a blur of gray sky and dark water. I remember the shock of the cold as it hit my back, the roar of the wind in my ears, and the final, horrifying image of my son turning his back on us to start a second, hidden engine on the boat, his face impassive as he sped away, leaving us to die in his brother's watery grave. The shock of the cold water stole the air from my lungs. For a moment, there was only a chaos of churning gray waves and the sting of rain on my face. The weight of my clothes was immense, a shroud pulling me down into the deep. I surfaced, gasping, my hair plastered to my face. A few feet away, Frank's head broke the surface. We looked at each other, two old people left to die in the middle of a storm. In the distance, the hum of Alex's boat was a fading, triumphant sound. I saw him and Jessica silhouetted against the darkening sky. I think I even saw them embrace, a victory hug. They thought they had won. They thought it was over. We trod water, the waves slapping against our faces, the cold seeping deep into our bones. The beautiful home we had built was just a faint shape on the distant shore, a world away. Every instinct screamed to panic, to cry for help, but Frank's voice was in my head, a calm, steady anchor in the storm. No splashing. No fighting. Let them think we're gone. We floated in the water, two pieces of human debris, and waited until the sound of his boat had vanished completely, swallowed by the wind. When he was certain they were gone, Frank turned to me. His face was grim, his lips blue with cold, but his eyes were clear. There was no fear in them. There was only the quiet, focused intensity of the captain he had always been. "Okay, Carol," he said, his voice steady despite his chattering teeth. "Now." He took a deep breath, went underwater for a second, and when he came up, he was holding the small, orange emergency beacon he had checked the day before. He'd tucked it into the waistband of his pants. With numb fingers, he flipped open the plastic cover and pressed the button. A tiny red light began to blink, a steady, pulsing heartbeat in the gray chaos of the storm. And then we waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The rain came down harder, cold, and relentless. The waves grew higher, lifting us up on their crests and dropping us into their troughs. We held on to each other to share warmth, our bodies trembling uncontrollably. All we had was the tiny blinking red light and a lifetime of faith in each other. I thought about Alex and Jessica, probably opening their sparkling water, celebrating their newfound inheritance. They were heading back to our dock, ready to call 911 and play the part of the hysterical, grieving survivors of a tragic accident. But Frank hadn't just planned for a rescue, he'd planned for justice. As we floated there, I remembered the conversation we'd had in his workshop 2 nights before. He had explained it to me with the calm precision of a man detailing a battle plan. He wasn't just activating a beacon, he was springing a trap he had set days ago. As a retired first responder, he knew the system. He had called a friend of his, a commander at the regional Coast Guard station, and filed what he called a high-risk float plan. He told the commander everything: his son's name, the boat's description, their intended route, and he told them about the threat. He said that if they received a distress signal from this specific beacon, in this specific search grid, they were not to treat it as a standard rescue. They were to treat it as a suspected felony in progress. He had turned his own rescue into a 911 call, with the location, suspects, and motive all included. Just as a wave of despair began to wash over me, a new sound cut through the howl of the wind. It wasn't thunder, it was a deep, powerful thrum, a sound that vibrated through the water and into my bones. Then, through the sheets of rain, I saw it. Two powerful searchlights sliced through the gloom, sweeping across the water. A moment later, the source of the light emerged from the mist, a massive white and orange Coast Guard cutter, moving with an unstoppable authority. It wasn't looking for us. It was heading directly for the shore, for the dock where our son would be arriving. The cutter intercepted Alex's sleek little boat just as it was entering the cove. It was like a wolf cornering a jackal. The massive vessel dwarfed its wake rocking it violently. Then, a voice, amplified and utterly impersonal, boomed across the water, a voice that carried the full weight of the law. "Alex Miller, this is the U.S. Coast Guard. We have received a distress signal. Shut down your engine. Now." We watched from the water as the searchlights pinned Alex and Jessica in their cockpit, their faces pale and stunned in the harsh white glare. Their perfect crime, their carefully constructed story, had just collided with a wall of truth built by a man who had spent his life bringing order to chaos. The trap had been sprung. A smaller rescue boat was dispatched from the cutter for us. Strong, impersonal hands pulled us from the freezing water, wrapping us in thick, scratchy wool blankets. I remember the smell of diesel fuel and hot coffee, the most comforting combination I had ever known. As we were motored back toward the cutter, huddled together and shivering, I watched the main event unfold. The storm was passing, and the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a dramatic, theatrical light on the scene. It was like a stage had been lit just for the final act. The Coast Guard didn't board Alex's boat. They escorted it, a predator herding its prey back to the den, and the den was our community dock. When we rounded the final point into our cove, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a quiet arrest. The dock was lit up like a Christmas tree with the flashing red and blue lights of 3 state police cars. Several of our neighbors, the ones with the multi-million-dollar lakefront properties and the perfectly manicured lawns, were standing on their decks, their curiosity overcoming their good manners. They were about to get the show of a lifetime. Our rescue boat docked quietly at the far end, and we were helped onto the pier, still wrapped in our blankets. A detective in a trench coat, a man with tired but kind eyes, met us, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, he said, his voice a low rumble. "We have everything. Just stay here. You've done your part." And so we stood there, 2 wet, exhausted old people, and watched the end of our son's world. The Coast Guard cutter held its position in the cove, a silent, white sentinel, while the police officers walked down the dock to meet Alex's boat as it was forced to moor. I saw Alex first. He was shouting, his face contorted with arrogant indignation. He was a man used to being in charge, a man who could talk his way out of anything. He was treating the officers like incompetent employees. "This is an outrageous mistake," he yelled, his voice echoing across the water. "My parents had an accident. We were coming back to call for help. You have no right." The detective didn't raise his voice. He simply walked to the edge of the dock, holding a laptop. He turned the screen toward Alex and Jessica. "Is that so, Mr. Miller?" he asked calmly. "Because we have a video here from a camera in your parents' kitchen. And a recording of a phone call. I believe the one where you discussed their life insurance policy." The blood drained from Alex's face. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He was a fish pulled from the water, gasping in an element he didn't understand: the truth. But it was Jessica who broke first. Her perfectly constructed facade didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces, her face twisted into a mask of pure primal panic. She lunged forward, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at her husband. "It was his idea!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound that tore through the quiet evening. "All of it! He told me they were confused. He said they wanted me to have the house. He planned everything. I didn't want to do it. He made me." The betrayal was so sudden, so total, it was almost beautiful in its ugliness. Alex looked at his wife, the last ally in his life, and the disbelief in his eyes was absolute. The partnership, the united front, the entire life they had built on a foundation of lies, had dissolved in a single desperate scream. That was the real fallout. Not the police, not the evidence, but the moment they turned on each other. The detective just nodded slowly. "Ma'am, you'll have plenty of time to give us your statement." He gestured to two uniformed officers. "Cuff them." The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs was the final sound. I watched them lead my son and his wife up the dock in front of everyone. All of his wealth, his tailored suits, his smooth talk, it all meant nothing. In the end, he was just a man in a wet polo shirt, his hands bound behind his back, his perfect life in ruins. As Jessica was led past me, her eyes met mine. I didn't see remorse. I didn't see regret or a plea for forgiveness. I saw only the cold, bitter fury of being caught. In that moment, I knew there was no soul there to save. The lesson was that some people are beyond redemption. The only thing you can do is get out of their way and let justice run its course. Frank put his arm around me, his grip firm and steady. We stood on the dock, watching the police cars pull away, their flashing lights disappearing down our quiet country road. The storm was over. The lake was calm. And for the first time in 15 years, our house felt safe.